In one of my last videos, I talked about Blackmagic RAW on the Panasonic S5ii and X, and why I think it's the best recording option for those looking to maximize the image quality out of the camera for video recording, and also the editing performance and flexibility in post. If you haven't watched that video already, I'd highly recommend checking it out, as it goes over the pros and cons of Blackmagic RAW, as well as comparing it to the internal codecs, especially now that they've fixed the implementation on these bodies compared to the first generation of the S series cameras. I got a lot of interest on my compact Blackmagic RAW setup that I showed in my last video, so in this video I'll be doing a full breakdown of the rig, all the bits and pieces, as well as potential suggestions for those looking to customize the setup for their own needs. My goal with this setup was to be as compact and minimalist as possible, retaining the small nature of the S series cameras, while being able to use the camera to its full potential. So I made sure I have quick release parts on this, which allows me to tear it down quickly into a backpack for situations where you might need to move quickly. I also wanted to minimize the fuss from the setup, and I made sure to have everything as organized and as neat as possible so nothing gets in the way while you're filming. I've been using this setup for the last 3 months or so and has served me very well. I shot a video linked down below in the description with this setup when I took this to a trip in the States, and it served me very well for that. And as always, all the parts that I mention here will be linked down in the description below. At the heart of this build is the Panasonic S5ii. This body needs no introduction. I'm sure at this point you're all well aware of the capabilities and image quality that this body offers. And I have mine in a Smallrig black Mamba cage. Generally, I find this to be the best cage offering for these bodies, as it's the lightest, most secure, and with the most versatile mounting options. I have used a Tilta half cage before, and I find that it's not as comfortable to hold, especially if you're using manual focus lenses. It does have a sharp lip at the end, and the mounting options on that cage are actually non-standard, so regular Smallrig accessories usually won't fit as it has non-standard hole spacing. On top of this cage, I've got a low-profile 48mm NATO rail from Smallrig screwed onto the top. This allows me to detach and attach a monitor very quickly without having to screw or unscrew bolts, and it makes this setup super easy and seamless to set up and take down into a backpack. Next up is the Blackmagic Video Assist 12G HDR. I've got the 5-inch version of this, as I prefer the smaller size and weight of this for my handheld setups. And I have a NATO rail screwed into the bottom of the cage, as unfortunately the USB-C port placement on this monitor is pretty abysmal, and mounting it with a normal monitor mount, which would just screw onto the bottom center thread, would get in the way of the port. At the bottom of the rig, I have a 70mm NATO rail mounted from Smallrig. This is a standard size NATO rail, not a low profile one, as the low profile ones have a larger corner radius and that gets in the way of the USB-C port. So unfortunately you have to go with the standard size ones here, which adds some extra Z height to the monitor. The NATO rail elevates the monitor a little bit higher and also leaves some space for the USB-C cable to fit in, which allows you to use an external SSD with this monitor. At the back of the monitor, one of the custom additions I made is a 3D printed battery plate. This simply slots into the NP-F slot in the monitor, and I have some Velcro tape on the back, which allows me to stick my Samsung T7 Shield SSD. This allows you to mount the SSD directly to the monitor without any extra rigging, and generally saves a lot of weight and extra size on your rig, as normally you'd have to use one of Smallrig's SSD mounts to mount it to your cage or handles. I haven't had any issues with this setup at all in terms of security of the SSD. It's able to support the weight of the monitor on its own just by holding the SSD, so rest assured this won't fall if you secure it properly. If you'd like to 3D print your own, I'll leave a link in the description to an STL file when I get access to my main rig. For the SSD, I'm a big fan of the Samsung T7 Shield drives. Despite having a similar name to the regular Samsung T7, these are actually completely different internally. The T7 Shields are actually optimized for sustained read and write, similar to the load you'd be placing on them when recording RAW at high data rates straight to the SSD for long periods of time. I have recorded over 20 hours of footage to these drives, and I have had not a single drop frame. I can't say the same about the regular T7, as I've had slowdowns, stutters, and skipped frames when recording to those drives, so if you're looking to pick one up, ensure it's the Shield version of the T7. Recording Blackmagic RAW 6K at 8:1 compression, you'll get over 6 hours of runtime for a single T7 Shield SSD of 2 TB in size. And you can find these real cheap nowadays, and I think these are a great value, especially if you're looking to record to an SSD. These are approved media by Blackmagic and also Panasonic if you'd like to record ProRes directly from the camera. I simply peel the rubber off of one of my own drives, and this allows you to adhere Velcro tape to the back, and this allows me to stick it directly on the monitor without having to use any extra rigging accessories. To mount the monitor, I have a Smallrig Dual NATO rail mount. This has a NATO rail on both the top and the bottom, allowing you to detach your monitor and the body quickly and easily. And I've been using it with dual batteries quite often, and I've had no issues with it supporting the weight of the entire setup. Getting into the building process, it's pretty self-explanatory. I like to start with the monitor mount, making sure it's dead center on the camera's EVF prism. Then I generally mount the video assist, centering the monitor mount over the logo at the bottom. Over here, you want to ensure that you leave enough space for the USB-C cable's head, as sometimes it can interfere and you want to make sure you're not squeezing it past the port. After that, I connect my short 90-degree 8-inch USB-C cable. And I like to mount the SSD with the port facing up, as this uses up the slack in the cable and makes a neat and organized setup. For batteries, I'm a big fan of the Neweer F750 L series batteries. This middle-sized battery gives me almost exactly 2 hours of runtime, which matches the camera's internal battery runtime quite well. I find that these batteries are a sweet spot for runtime and size. If you prefer, you can go for something larger like the F970s. The ones I recommend for that are the Watson branded ones from B&H. The 74 watt-hour one that I have lasts a little over 3 hours and is good if you're looking for some extended runtime. Now, moving on to the HDMI cable, this one was a tricky find. It's a flat ribbon cable with an angled connector that's very low profile, unlike the standard 90-degree HDMI cables you'd see. Compared to your traditional HDMI cable with the connector that stakes out, this allows you to open up the camera screen almost all the way, something you can't normally do with traditional connectors. Overall, now the setup does weigh more than just the camera itself. I find that it's a worthy compromise, especially for the functionality you gain. The monitor is super easy for using manual focus, it's nice and bright, it's easy to use, and the assist tools for exposure are also quite handy to have. To mitigate some of the weight of the setup, I like to hold my hand on the battery itself that's mounted on the monitor, as I find that it takes some of the weight off my main supporting hand. So, what are your thoughts on this rig? If you have any suggestions for a similar compact rig, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. If you have any other suggestions on topics you'd like me to cover related to Panasonic cameras, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.